I'm the director of Wellbeing, but I do spend most of my time in the senior school. When I think about why I wrote 50 Risks, I wrote it around how I think a year 7 student should be. And this might sound like a really general comment, and for some of you that's next year, and for some of you that's years and years away. But I was focused on students as they arrive on day 1 and what they're like. And there's a huge difference in a year group. I'm teaching year 7 at the moment. There is a huge difference among 15 students. So I thought, as an active way to start this, I'd do a bit of a temperature check on you, on what you think kids should be able to do when they start year 7. So for some of you, this is like 6 months away, some of you, this is a while ago. So I'm going to start definitely on the riskier side and then bring it back. So can everyone please stand up? Okay, so as you agree with these statements, you've got to sit down. And remember, if you think it's too risky, just keep standing. I would love to say have your eyes shut so you're not looking at what other people are saying, but that in and of itself is probably not in the risk assessment. So, 1, a year 7 student should be able to look after themselves after school, effectively be home until parents get back from work.
Sit down if it's okay. Right?
Sit down if you think that's okay. Okay. A year 7 student should be able to get to school and back on their own.
Yeah.
A year 7 student should be able to go to the shops on their own, like bread or milk.
Yeah.
A year 7 student, okay, cool, okay. I had a lot prepared, I even had some extra backups. I would say though, so many of you feel okay about your kids kind of getting home 3:20 and hanging out till like 5:30 in a year or 6 years' time.
I can 6, yeah.
Okay, so then the whole point of 50 Risks is what are the steps to get them there? And it doesn't happen overnight, and it's one of those things we need to think about as early as kindy. So I honestly believe that a year 7 student should be able to do all these things I've mentioned. You didn't need to hear as many of them as I thought though, so that was good, Liz. Maybe not being home all night, but an element of latchkey kids is not necessarily a bad thing, and that's why I wrote 50 Risks. Over-parenting, and it has been written about by many people and far better than I have done it, is a curse, because what we are doing when we are there for everything and doing everything for our kids is not giving them the opportunity to be there for themselves. And while year 7 might be many years away for your daughter, the steps to get there should be fun and easy and a little bit risky. You really do want to be the tortoise and not the hare on this. And that's why I hope that if you read the book, you do think that a good proportion of these risks, as Liz said, are really obvious and common sense and not that difficult to do. They're meant to be they're not meant to be scary for everyone, but for some people they will be quite scary. So that's why I wrote it and who I wrote it for. I want to be very clear that it was never written for families who are at risk of underparenting or not giving their kids their basic needs. So I assume there are florets of broccoli that are being rejected on a daily basis. So the first thing I want to talk about is, the benefits of failure. We have all failed at something. Probably at many things. We all know in our hearts and in our souls that those moments of cringe when you're walking up the stairs and you realise you said something stupid at that meeting are part of life. And we know that failure spurs on more learning, and we know we learn from experience, right? This is all things we know, right? We know you can't actually circumnavigate it, and you can't circumnavigate failure and pain as though it is an iceberg and we're a cruise ship. And yet we constantly stop our kids from experiencing failure. And it hurts them. Not subliminally, but it actually hurts them. The best time to fail and to experience failure and come out good from failure is when you're in a loving home with a great community around you, like some cats. We all know resilience is good, but nobody wants to actually test that theory out on their kids. So to give you an idea of some of the stuff I say to my kids, when Jack doesn't get a merit award and one of his friends does, he's in year 2, I'll be like, but did you really try your hardest at that? Or when he says he can't find something, I often say, that sounds like a Jack problem, not a mummy problem. He doesn't like that. It's a good line though, you should use it. So in the book, I have some risks that help your kids experience failure, but life really does offer up enough. So sports teams, orchestras, nippers, birthday parties. The reason for this is we all know that not everyone can get what they want all the time. And discovering that at age 25, when you are meant to be an adult and know all the things, is really hard. You don't want your kid discovering this at 25. And there is a vast spectrum between letting your kid learn to make friends on their own and regularly traumatizing them for the sake of experience. And that is not what I'm advocating at all. It's not designed like the kind of Monty Python sketch of, or like I used to walk 10 miles in the snow to school every day. That's one of the quotes in the book that my editor was like, really, you want to put this in? I was like, yes, I do. We know the world of work wants people who are resilient, that are emotionally intelligent, and that have social awareness. And these soft skills, which often get mocked by like ministers and education departments, are really important. We know that character is just as important as skill and content knowledge, which is why at St Cat's we're developing students of character and intellect who are ready to make their unique contribution to the world. Was that right? I think that was right. Yes, good. Okay, so the first thing. The first one I want to talk to you about is the importance of getting into routines. Routines are really important for young kids. And while I'm really celebrating that my 4-year-old is no longer tethered to the 7 p.m. bedtime and we can like go to a friend's barbecue and kind of stay a bit later, I can get her in the pajamas and everything, all that, that's really good. Routines are important for kids because it is in the known that we develop our autonomy. When you have a set morning routine before school that your kid knows really well, then you can start getting them to do parts of it. Eventually, fast forward to the year 7 student I want all your daughters to be, your daughter should be doing the whole morning routine on their own. And they should be getting up, making their bed, getting dressed, having and putting away breakfast, brushing teeth, feeding the dog, and getting to school. Does that sound really good? Like, you're just like, oh my God, that can happen? I didn't know that could happen. If sometimes you go to Bellagio or have different routines, it's harder for them to take full control of that. Once they are totally across that morning routine, that's when you can start branching out and adding more things to it. Or maybe you have the Bellagio routine as part of your thing once a week. I know my kids understand that I have every second Friday I have period 1, so I absolutely have to be here by 8 a.m. And so they know that every second Friday we are in a rush, but then they'll be like, is this the slow Friday or the fast Friday? I'm like, it's the slow Friday, that cool. The point is though, routines mean your kid can make fewer decisions and then get more autonomous. And I know in the junior school, students are already doing that. They're kind of putting their things away. They're using their lockers. They're doing all of that on their own, which is great. That's what we want to see. I can tell you for next year, the most exciting thing about year 7 is a locker. The girls go absolutely crazy about them and they're really confused about them. But like this concept of a locker and organising themselves and having this locker space is really exciting to them. So getting them into a routine of being responsible for their own routine is really helpful. Homework routines are equally important. In junior school, I can't imagine girls are getting hours of homework each day, but getting into that routine of completing homework before TV or before whatever, activity you do is really good. That ability to go from 0 to studying in less than 5 minutes is one you want locked in before senior school, because then they can just focus on the content and the skills of high school, and that's really important as well. You're probably now wondering why Barack Obama is here. You probably all know that he wore the same colour shirt every single day. Did you know this? Yeah. So Barack Obama wore the same colour shirt every single day because he didn't want to make any more decisions than he had to, because running the free world would probably involve a few. Routines mean that you can use your brain for bigger and more interesting decisions. We know that people in lower socioeconomic groups have a cognitive load from deciding whether to buy milk or bread. Their brain capacity starts to be taken up by these decisions. Now, at St Cat's, for the most part, we don't need to worry about that. So getting into autopilot with some activities will give your daughter's brain space to learn and expand. Although counter to that, and I'm going to absolutely just negate what I'm going to say, it's going to be really interesting. We know that most kids growing up in middle-class families, especially at schools like St Cat's, are the richest they'll ever be. Apparently they're the richest they'll ever be by year 10. So while they don't have to think about whether to buy milk or bread, they also don't necessarily have an inbuilt drive to work hard to achieve goals. So where it is important to talk to kids about the benefits of hard work, and this is where I'm going to cross, it's also important that they understand that that work is important. They're going to understand that work's important, but then I will get back to the issue of work being important around kids. Rick Morton, in his mini book on money, which I have in there, writes about the cognitive load of money through his experience of having it for the first time. And he writes, and I just think he's a brilliant writer, so I'm adding it in. In only the last year, for the first time in my adult life, I've been able to live without constantly checking my bank account. After a dinner recently, my friend Tom texted to make sure I'd received his bank transfer for his share of the meal. I honestly didn't know because I hadn't looked at it in over a week. That I could go an entire week without checking whether I had enough money to make purchases was revolutionary. The daily stress had gone. Now we know our girls do not have this stress, but the stress of not knowing what's happening each day and their processes equates to it. So getting them into a really good routine is really important. So the next thing I'm going to talk about goes on from mental health. The stats are really clear for all to see on teen mental health, and that's obviously the area I focus on. We know that half of all mental health conditions we experience at some point in our lives will have started by age 14, so that's year 8 or 9. 6.9% of children aged 4 to 17 had experienced an anxiety disorder in the past 12 months, and 5% of teens aged 12 to 17 will have a major depressive disorder. This is especially high for teenage girls. When I think about anxiety and depression, which are the two biggest mental health diagnoses for teenagers, I think about fear and I think about a lack of control. So anxiety is a fear of the future or of the unknown, and it sets in motion the body's fight, flight, or freeze response. Anxiety leads to avoidance. Depression, on the other hand, is about feeling like everything is out of one's control and that there is nothing that can be done. Mental health has obviously been a big topic this year and last year due to COVID, and it has to be dealt with proactively and preventatively, which is of course what we do at St Catherine's in our Wellbeing program, K-12. In fact, this week I read an article in The Guardian that said, and I'm going to read it, so apologies for a lack of eye contact, there is a predominant focus on the mental health system, meaning that the social factors influencing mental health and wellbeing are not actually being recognised. The focus always downplays the importance of communities, workplaces, and education settings in shaping good mental health and wellbeing. System leaders need to better support these places and settings to support good mental health and wellbeing. So whatever we're meant to be doing with our kids to protect them, we need to do it as a community. So what can we do in relation to protective factors and proactive factors to keep our kids from going down this path of anxiety and depression? The first is to give them more responsibility, for the very simple reason that people feel better about themselves when they are contributing. We know that unemployment is a factor in developing depression. Similarly for kids, feeling like they have no say in anything and that they are scared of doing things for the first time actually develops more anxiety in them. McKay Csikszentmihalyi, whose name I cannot spell but I'm an absolute gun at pronouncing, created flow theory. The idea that of doing something that is that little bit difficult, but you are totally immersed in it. When we give kids things to do that are too easy and they know it's not actually contributing to the family in any way, like everyone's setting the table and they're doing something that has nothing to do with that, they feel useless, they get bored and they don't feel like they're helping. So we want them to work on things that are a bit harder so they get to that sense of flow. Similarly, when I say that kids should have more say, that doesn't mean they should become mini dictators in your homes, but that you should give them responsibility for things they can manage. The state of their room, the dinner table, their homework. Because if they don't learn this, if they don't learn consequence, and if they don't learn to do something, they don't learn about consequence, and if they don't learn about consequence, they become incredibly entitled. So if anxiety is brought on from fear of doing new things, then expose them to new things. If depression comes from feeling like everything is out of their control and they have no say in anything, give them a little bit more control with responsibility. Also, this is being said in the context of the impacts of COVID, and we know this had a huge impact on kids. My son, who's usually super social, freaked out when we went to a party the other day because he hadn't seen that many people in a room together for over a year. So while we are trying to expose them to new things, we're actually also going to be kind of re-exposing them to old things that they may not have done or seen in ages. The other thing that's really important is to suck at things. I think there is too much expectation on kids to be brilliant at something, or in some cases to be brilliant at everything. I can tell you I sucked at a lot more things than I didn't suck at, and in all honesty, that's probably still the case. I sucked so much at any form of sports that I had to learn how to debate, and I'm hoping that means I don't suck right now. The whole point of sucking at something as a kid is that it is a good experience to go through then, as a kid, as opposed to finding out when you're 17 that you don't make the team. And if your daughter is brilliant at something, then make sure she also experiences things she's not good at, Like even if it's just she's really brilliant at tennis, get her playing netball for fun, because it's important to understand what it's like to not be brilliant at everything. I'm Christian. This is a Christian school, so I can say that for me, knowing I'm loved by God, regardless of my achievements, makes life feel pretty safe. When we place our value in our work or on our looks or on our youth, we will ultimately fail. I couldn't really include that in the book, but I hope it's okay I snuck it in there. And this is where it is also really important to role model to your kids a healthy relationship with work. This is where I'm just going to totally contradict what I said a few minutes ago. To not always be waving them off because you have a call or an email to attend to, while also ensuring they understand that work is important. And I think this is what's a really hard thing to balance, especially last year when we were all working from home. We don't want to be saying to our kids, it's just work. I've got to do this, it's just work, it's just an email. Because work is important. It gives us purpose. It keeps the wolf from the door, but it gives us purpose. And we want our kids to know that we work hard, and that's why we work hard, and saying, well, I'm doing this so we can one day in the future go on holidays maybe. But, this is why I do it. But at the same time, not communicating that all of your value is in work. And I think that that's a really hard thing to, balance. Parenting is difficult. So, the worst first principle. So, Lenore Skenazy was known, have you guys ever heard of her? She started Free Range Kids. So she was known as America's worst mother because she let her 10-year-old get the subway from a museum in New York back home. Her kid loved it. He was really obsessed with the subway system. He wanted to read the maps. He wanted to know the stations. He wanted to get the tokens and all of that. And she wrote about it. And it was just an absolute uproar. Everyone said she'd done the wrong thing and she's irresponsible. The problem we're dealing with here is in two parts. We naturally practice what she calls the worst first principle, and we don't know where the law ends and the judgment begins. And I think that's especially the case with getting your kids to go to the shops or anything like that. The worst first principle is very simple. You think of the worst possible thing that could happen and then place that first in your mind. And I think as parents we do that a lot. It is the go-to of catastrophizers. Don't get out of bed, might step on a spider, don't walk down the street, might get hit by a bus, don't go in the ocean, might get eaten by sharks. With kids, as parents, we are meant to protect them, yes, but that protection is coming at a huge cost, which is they don't know how to do anything, and we are left buttering bread and walking to the shops when they could be doing it themselves, and in fact it would be very good for them to do it themselves. So yes, kids can hurt themselves and horrible things can happen, but remember, we are the safest we've ever been. And bringing kids up with the expectation that anything that can go wrong will just instill more fear in them. And like I said, that can bring up anxiety. Interestingly, while researching this book, I started going, well, what happened to those safety, those neighbourhood safety houses? Do you remember? I remember them when I was a kid. They don't exist anymore, right? So I started Googling why don't they exist. Kids weren't out in the streets, so they didn't need them. So they got rid of them. And now it's like, even if you wanted your kid to kind of wander around and go bike riding, there aren't any of those houses because there aren't enough kids out there. And I think that that's where it really goes to this idea of where does the law end and judgment begin. On a New South Wales website, it says that you should be holding your child's hand walking down the street until they are 12. And my son is almost 8 and basically my height, so he has very little interest in holding my hand, and I'm very glad for it. So I do think there's that issue. You also don't want to be the first parent in your street getting your kid out riding a bike because it's kind of lonely to ride a bike on your own. So it's also about kind of getting friends into it or neighbours and getting them supportive of the idea. Boredom. I wanted to touch on boredom briefly because there is a beauty and problem-solving element to boredom. I think we overschedule our weekends and we don't give kids a chance to be bored and potter about. And it's in that pottering time that they pick up a musical instrument or they start drawing or they start writing or whatever it is. It's where creativity starts. At its heart, boredom is important because it is when we are bored we are learning how to entertain ourselves, when currently we just have entertainment thrust at us on screens. So I think building in time to be bored, and when your kid says I'm bored, saying that's good, instead of trying to fix a problem, is a really important thing to let kids do, especially as they get older, especially in a library, get them reading. Another reason why your kids should go to the shop or get you coffee on a Saturday morning or whatever it is that it lets them understand safety. And this relates to consent. and relationships as your kids grow up. That ability to innately understand whether you feel comfortable around a person or not is really important to develop. And it can't be outsourced, and yet that's what we're doing. Think about going to the bathroom. When did you, or have you, stopped taking your kid, hello, come sit down in the front.
Sorry.
Stop taking your kid to the bathroom if you're at a playground or a restaurant or a cafe or whatever. When do you start to trust them to go to the bathroom on their own? And most of your kids are old enough that they're going to the bathroom on their own, right? I still take my 4-year-old, but my almost 8-year-old has been going solo for a while. He has not had a moment where he feels uncomfortable, but he certainly won't have one if I'm with him there all the time to protect him. When we do everything with and for our kids, we're taking away their ability to understand their own safety. Brent Sanders has been talking to the staff today. He's an ex-cop and talks about consent and he talks to businesses and universities and schools. He's brilliant. He's been talking for over 20 years. He spoke to me when I was in year 10. And he talks about this issue around the stranger danger campaign, and it's a really interesting one. Kids are taught stranger danger, strangers are dangerous, and then, we just tell kids never to talk to strangers. We actually know that 98% of assault against kids is by someone they know. Family, extended family, or coaches, etc. The stranger danger campaign is very important, but it's also flawed in that it tells kids that the people most likely to harm them are the ones they should trust. And now when your daughters are teenagers, the person most likely to harm them is someone their age that they know and trust. It's a friend of theirs. So really, keeping them away from strangers isn't necessarily the best strategy. Teaching them to identify their own internal judgment is. And I'm not saying go start conversations with strangers in the street. I'm saying go to the shops and pay for milk or, trust them to get something or whatever it is. Give them real life experience, because if you're happy for all of your kids in year 7 to be home and walk home on their own, then they're going to be talking to strangers, or there will be strangers around. Zoom forward to year 9 or 10 or 11. If your daughter is in a situation where someone is trying to pressure them into doing something they don't want to do, they won't know if they feel uncomfortable or not if they haven't developed that skill when they're younger. And again, I'm not saying in a traumatising way. We are safer now than we ever have been, but that doesn't mean our kids shouldn't learn to measure their own safety. On consent, and I know a lot of you want to know more about it, I really thought I understood it until I watched a video about milkshakes. It's not whether or not to ask a baby whether or not you can change their nappy, but it's about giving them control and autonomy over their bodies, respecting and talking to them about boundaries and making them respect yours as well. Because if you have a kid who pushes you and pushes you and pushes you and you just give in and do whatever they want all the time, then they will think that that is what gets them what they want. There are some little convos you can have. So, and it's funny because having kids that are this young and then talking to teenagers that are that tall, I notice I talk a lot to my little kids about it. And then I know in the, senior years we talk about it as well, but it's like, how do you keep that conversation going? And schools do a lot about it. We do a lot when we talk about respect and healthy relationships. I do a session with year 7 on boundaries and friendships, but and then in year 10 as well. But it's also the role of parents to have these conversations and to be the thread that connects the whole way through. So my daughter is very adamant that she's the boss of her body and tries to explain that means she shouldn't have to have a bath. It doesn't work that way. We talk about respecting people's boundaries. And also, because something Brent was saying to the girls, and I had to sit in all 3 of his sessions, so I know it off by heart now, that coercion is not consent. So that idea of can I have an ice cream? No. Can I have an ice cream? No. Can I have an ice cream? No. It's fine, just have the bloody ice cream. That's not actually consent. And even, I was talking to my son about that. I'm like, that's not actually me agreeing for you to have an ice cream. I'm not happy that you're having an ice cream. You're getting an ice cream because you bullied me into it, and explaining that difference. And I also think for anyone in the audience who has sons, it's really important to talk to your son about emotions and ask them what or how questions. Don't ask boys yes or no questions. Are there any sons in the room? Anyone? Okay, good. Just so I'm not talking to only daughter people. Boys will answer any question as a yes or no question. So you have to make it as open as possible. What's that like for you? Or how was that? Why is okay, but why is quite judgy? A lot of society tries to shut down emotions in boys, and that's why they can often rely too heavily on status. Testosterone seeks status, that's what it does. By giving boys the opportunity to feel all their feelings and normalise talking about feelings, and obviously shutting down anything like boys don't cry or you throw like a girl, we can raise all genders with a social emotional literacy and respect for each other. The risks I've written in the book are structured as physical risks, like climbing trees and learning to ride a bike, and I think we're frankly least concerned about these. There are also character risks that help develop their own character and their resilience. There are social risks because we are made to be in relation with others, and making friends and ending friendships is awkward, and that's something kids need to learn. And finally, there are parenting risks. The parenting risks are by far the hardest ones to do because they involve letting go. But letting go of your kids should be the fun of it. I wrote 50 risks to take with your kids to help parents raise 10-year-olds that they actually want to hang out with. I'm working on a teenage book, which is 50 questions to ask your teen, and that's about raising an adult that actually wants to hang out with you. And that's the bit I'm trying to perfect. I have time for questions and everything. I know I just threw a lot of information at you, and the rest of it is in the book. Thank you.